War reveals truth, but only to those willing to listen. In the chaos of World War II, German officers once believed they understood war better than anyone alive. Their doctrine was sharp, their confidence unshaken. And when they first encountered American forces, many dismissed them, undisciplined, inexperienced, a nation of amateurs. But that illusion didn't last. By 1943, something had changed. In the deserts of North Africa and the rugged hills of Sicily, German units began reporting a different kind of enemy, one that didn't fight by the expected rules, one that attacked when it shouldn't, one that refused to behave. At the center of that shift stood a man the Germans would come to recognize and quietly fear. Terry de la Mesa, Allen Sr. Born in 1888, Allen was not the polished textbook officer the German high command respected. He was something far more dangerous, unpredictable, aggressive, and utterly relentless. Nicknamed Terrible Terry, Allen commanded the legendary 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Under his leadership, the division became something the Germans struggled to counter, a force that thrived in chaos. But Allen's true weapon wasn't brute strength. It was the night. While most commanders on both sides avoided combat after sunset, Allen saw opportunity. He trained his men relentlessly for night operations, tight coordination, silent movement, sudden violence. To him, darkness wasn't a limitation. It was cover. And to the Germans, it was terror. Units that believed they were safe after dusk would suddenly find themselves under attack. Close, disorienting, brutal. Allen's troops appeared out of nowhere, striking before defenses could form. German reports spoke of confusion, panic, and the inability to predict when or where the next blow would fall. This wasn't just tactics, it was psychological warfare. Allen understood something fundamental. Fear multiplies in the dark. His campaigns in North Africa and Sicily proved devastatingly effective. The 1st Infantry Division didn't just fight hard, they fought differently, faster, closer, with an aggression that mirrored, and in some cases exceeded, the German style of war. Even when Allen was controversially relieved of command after Sicily, his reputation didn't fade. He returned to lead the 104th Infantry Division, the Timberwolves, and once again, he reshaped them into elite night fighters. Across France and Germany, his units repeated the same pattern: relentless pressure, surprise assaults, and a battlefield where night offered no safety. German soldiers learned quickly. If Allen's division was across the line, sleep was a risk. Darkness was no longer protection. It was a warning. He wasn't the most elegant general. He wasn't the most strategic. But he was one of the most feared, because he changed the rules at the exact moment the enemy thought they understood them. And that was only the beginning. Because if Allen was chaos in the dark, the next man would bring something even more unsettling: precision, discipline, and a level of professionalism the Germans could not outmatch. If Terry Allen made the Germans fear the dark, Lucian Truscott made them fear precision. Born in 1895, Truscott did not come from the traditional elite mold. He had never attended West Point. He rose through discipline, intelligence, and sheer ability. Quiet in manner, controlled in temperament, and ruthless in standards, he became one of the most capable field commanders the U.S. Army produced during the war. Where Allen was explosive, Truscott was exact, and that made him deeply dangerous. The Germans first saw what kind of commander he was in Sicily. There, Truscott led the 3rd Infantry Division with a level of speed and efficiency that caught enemy forces off balance again and again. He demanded more from his men than most commanders thought reasonable. Forced marches were longer, faster, harsher. His troops moved at a pace so punishing it became famous: the Truscott Trot. 4 miles per hour over rough terrain, in combat conditions. That pace changed everything. It meant his forces could appear sooner than expected, hit harder than anticipated, and keep pressure on withdrawing German units before they could regroup. For German commanders used to timing enemy movements, Truscott was a problem. Their calculations kept failing, their assumptions kept breaking. And then came Anzio. This was where Truscott's reputation hardened into something even the Germans had to respect. The beachhead at Anzio had become a crisis. Allied forces were vulnerable, momentum had stalled, and German counterattacks threatened to crush the position entirely. When Truscott took command of 6th Corps, he inherited a battlefield full of tension, fatigue, and uncertainty. He responded the only way he knew how, with order, speed, and control. He reorganized the defenses, tightened command, restored confidence, and turned a fragile line into one that could absorb enormous punishment. Facing him was one of Germany's best commanders in Italy, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, a highly skilled opponent known for his defensive mastery and operational flexibility. Kesselring attacked hard. Truscott did not break. That mattered, because in German eyes, true military respect was earned not through speeches or image, but through performance under pressure. Truscott gave them exactly that. He did not gamble recklessly. He did not chase glory. He made the right decisions, kept his formations steady, and denied the Germans the openings they needed. That kind of commander is infuriating to fight. A reckless enemy can be baited. An arrogant one can be trapped. But a disciplined professional, one who trains hard, moves fast, and rarely makes mistakes, is far harder to defeat. That was Truscott. He later went on to command at even higher levels, including the Fifth Army, proving that his ability was not limited to division-level success. But to the Germans, his value was already clear much earlier. He represented the American army at its most competent. No flash, no theatrics, just relentless effectiveness. And sometimes that is more frightening than fury. Because fury can burn out. Competence does not. If Allen made the battlefield feel unstable, Truscott made it feel hopelessly controlled. He gave the Germans an opponent they could neither intimidate nor easily outthink. He wasn't just brave, he was reliable. And in war, reliability in the hands of a talented commander becomes a weapon of its own. But if Truscott represented discipline, the next man represented devastation. Not maneuver, not finesse, pure destruction. If Lucian Truscott made the Germans respect American professionalism, James Van Fleet made them fear American firepower. Born in 1892, Van Fleet was a career soldier, hard, disciplined, and utterly unsentimental. He was not a theatrical figure. He did not cultivate legend the way Patton did. He did not dominate headlines. But on the battlefield, he built a reputation that was just as deadly. Because Van Fleet understood one brutal truth better than most commanders: if you can pin the enemy in place, you can destroy him. His rise during the war was not built on showmanship, but on results. In Normandy, and later in the savage fighting across Western Europe, Van Fleet proved himself as a commander who combined infantry pressure with overwhelming artillery force. He believed in breaking an enemy not with elegance, but with concentrated violence, and the Germans felt that violence in full. Van Fleet became closely associated with what was often described as the Van Fleet load, an immense weight of artillery fire, far heavier than standard concentrations. Whether in attack or defense, his instinct was clear. Once the enemy was located, crush him under shells until resistance collapsed. To German troops, this was more than dangerous. It was demoralizing. American artillery already had a fearsome reputation. German soldiers repeatedly acknowledged its speed, accuracy, and scale. But under Van Fleet, that fear seemed intensified. Positions thought secure were shattered. Assembly points became death traps. Units preparing to counterattack were broken apart before they could even move. There was no romance in this kind of warfare, only destruction. And Van Fleet never pretended otherwise. He was not looking for a beautiful maneuver or a dramatic tactical flourish. He wanted results: terrain taken, resistance crushed, enemy formations ruined beyond recovery. In that sense, he embodied one of the most unsettling features of the American war machine: the ability to combine manpower, logistics, communications, and artillery into a system the Germans increasingly could not match. By 1944, this imbalance had become terrifyingly clear. Germany still had skilled officers, experienced troops, and a tradition of operational flexibility. But what it lacked was the industrial depth to answer American bombardment blow for blow. Van Fleet exploited that weakness without hesitation. His commands drove forward with a grim logic. Infantry fixed the Germans in place. Artillery tore them apart. Any attempt to hold ground came at unbearable cost. That was the fear Van Fleet created. Not the fear of surprise, like Allen. Not the fear of flawless professionalism, like Truscott. His was the fear of inevitability. Once his system locked onto a target, the outcome felt less like a battle and more like a sentence. Captured German officers after the war often criticized American tactics as heavy-handed or unimaginative. But beneath that criticism was something more important: respect born from helplessness. They knew that what America lacked in subtlety, it could compensate for with material power on a scale Germany could no longer endure. Van Fleet was one of the clearest expressions of that power. He turned artillery from support arm into battlefield verdict. And for the ordinary German soldier, that mattered more than theory. It meant that digging in deeper might not save you. It meant that holding your line might only mark your grave more precisely. It meant that when Van Fleet's guns opened up, courage alone was no longer enough. Some generals terrified the enemy by outthinking them. Van Fleet terrified them by making resistance feel physically impossible. But even he still fought within the limits of the battlefield. The next commander did not. He brought war from above, systematic, relentless, and impossible to escape. If James Van Fleet made the Germans fear the ground beneath them, Curtis LeMay made them fear the sky itself. Born in 1906, LeMay belonged to a newer generation of American commanders, cold, analytical, and shaped by industrial war rather than old battlefield tradition. He did not build his reputation in foxholes or on armored spearheads. His battlefield was the air, and his weapon was organization on a scale the Germans struggled to comprehend. LeMay was not admired for charm. He was admired and feared for results. As a rising commander in the 8th Air Force, he became one of the men most closely associated with America's daylight strategic bombing campaign against Germany. This was not simply a matter of sending bombers over targets. It was a deadly contest of endurance, formation discipline, fighter interception, anti-aircraft fire, and industrial destruction. And LeMay approached it with ruthless clarity. He helped refine the combat box formation, a tightly organized bomber arrangement designed to maximize defensive firepower. From a distance, it looked almost mechanical. Layered bombers flying in disciplined groups, each protecting the others with overlapping machine gun coverage. For German fighter pilots, attacking these formations was a nightmare. Every pass brought a wall of return fire. Every interception carried the risk of destruction. But that was only part of why LeMay mattered. His real threat was deeper. He believed in pressing attacks through flak, through fighter opposition, through losses, because accuracy and consistency mattered more than comfort. He expected crews to hold formation and fly straight over heavily defended targets, even when the sky around them was filled with explosions. It was brutal, it was costly, and it worked. To the Germans, that kind of resolve was chilling, because it meant America was not merely raiding, it was dismantling oil facilities, aircraft plants, rail hubs, transportation networks, industrial districts. The bombing campaign struck at the structure of the German war machine itself, and LeMay represented the mindset behind it: war as relentless calculation, not symbolic attacks, not limited pressure, total degradation of the enemy's ability to keep fighting. High-ranking Luftwaffe officers, including men like Adolf Galland, wrote after the war about the tremendous strain imposed by the American bomber offensive. They respected the courage of the bomber crews, but what haunted Germany's leadership even more was the logic of the campaign. The bombers kept coming. Losses did not stop them. Damage did not stop them. Defensive victories did not stop them. And every raid forced Germany to spend more fuel, more pilots, more fighters, more guns, resources it could not endlessly replace. That is what made LeMay so dangerous. He transformed air power into sustained strategic suffocation. German generals had been trained to think in fronts, flanks, breakthroughs, and encirclements. LeMay operated on another level. He was not trying to seize a hill or break a division. He was trying to collapse the economic and industrial framework that made German resistance possible in the first place. That kind of warfare is terrifying because it offers no clean battlefield answer. You cannot counterattack a production shortfall. You cannot maneuver around burned refineries. You cannot hold a defensive line when the transport network behind it is being wrecked piece by piece. LeMay understood that modern war was not only fought by soldiers at the front, it was also fought by factories, rail systems, fuel reserves, and replacement capacity. And once America committed itself fully, Germany was forced into a contest of production it was unlikely to win. LeMay became one of the clearest symbols of that reality. To the German High Command, he represented something especially grim. a commander willing to spend lives and machines in pursuit of strategic paralysis. Hard, mathematical, and relentless, he embodied the industrial will of the United States at war. And yet, even with all that destruction from the sky, there was still one American general the Germans feared in a more personal, immediate way. One man whose name sounded less like a commander and more like a threat. If Curtis LeMay represented destruction from above, George S. Patton Jr. represented something the Germans feared on a far more instinctive level, a commander who fought like them. Born in 1885, Patton was a soldier by blood, temperament, and obsession. He studied military history constantly, believed in speed above caution, and saw war not as a burden to be managed, but as a violent contest to be dominated. To friend and enemy alike, he projected intensity. To the Germans, he projected danger. Because Patton understood the one language they respected most, offensive war. By the time American forces began breaking out across France in 1944, Patton had already built a reputation for aggression in North Africa and Sicily. His record was not spotless, and his personality was often controversial, but none of that mattered to the Germans as much as one thing. When Patton attacked, he did not give the enemy time to recover. That was his genius. He did not merely defeat formations, he unbalanced them. Under his command, Third Army became one of the most feared Allied field forces in Europe. Once unleashed after Normandy, it moved with astonishing speed, turning flanks, exploiting gaps, seizing crossings, overrunning supply routes, and keeping German commanders in a constant state of reaction. Units that expected a pause found pursuit. Units trying to regroup found envelopment. Units preparing a defense found Patton already beyond them. That operational tempo was devastating. German commanders were used to methodical Allied progress. They expected deliberate buildup, cautious movement, and predictable pauses. Patton shattered that expectation. His advances felt less like ordinary offensives and more like armored storms, violent, fast, and difficult to contain. That is why senior German officers spoke of him with unusual respect after the war. Alfred Jodl reportedly called him the American Guderian, comparing him to Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored warfare. For a German commander, there was hardly a greater compliment. General Günther Blumentritt described Patton as the most aggressive Allied armored leader, a man of remarkable initiative and speed. They saw in Patton something uncomfortable, a reflection of their own best tradition. He believed in momentum. He believed in shock. He believed in striking before the enemy could think clearly, and he understood that speed was not merely movement, it was psychological pressure. A tired enemy can still resist, a confused enemy can still fight, but an enemy denied time, denied rest, and denied certainty begins to crack. One German prisoner reportedly complained, "This Patton gives us no rest." That single idea captures his effect perfectly. Patton made war feel relentless. Day or night, attack or pursuit, his presence suggested that the pressure would not stop. That fear became so strong that the Allies used it as a weapon. During Operation Fortitude, the great deception before D-Day, Patton was placed at the center of the false threat aimed at Pas-de-Calais. Why? Because the Germans believed that if the main invasion was coming, Patton would be leading it. That assumption was not accidental, it was earned. His reputation alone had strategic value. Very few generals can claim that the enemy feared not only their army, but their name. Patton could. He was not the most diplomatic, not the most balanced, not the most universally admired within his own side. But through the eyes of the Germans, he stood apart because he threatened them in the way they understood best, as a master of fast, violent, armored war. Terry Allen brought fear and darkness. Lucian Truscott brought flawless professionalism. James Van Fleet brought annihilating firepower. Curtis LeMay brought industrial destruction from the sky. But Patton brought something more personal. He brought the terrifying realization that the Americans had produced a commander who could play the German game and win.